And I was actually sort of introduced to the project much later on. There was a script, not even a first draft, that Martin had written and developed with Mikael and Nordisk. And it was obviously a Danish-German co-production, because a lot of the cast clearly had to come from Germany, and it's a story that involves both countries. So we were introduced by the Danish Film Institute, because I had sort of previous involvement with Danish directors and Danish companies. And we were introduced in Berlin during the festival, I think.
Yeah, that was the first time.
3 years ago, something, and that's how I sort of came to the project.
He found an article about some clearing landmines that I didn't know of. And that was a very small article, but it says that the Danes broke the Geneva Convention right after the war because they were turning POWs into hard work and dangerous work on the beaches of the west coast of Denmark, clearing landmines. And we found that very interesting because the headline of that article was really, well, I have never read this before, what is that? And then we started to dig in and research the stories around that time. And it was very little we could find about that story, which also, gained our interest even more. And that's how the story, began.
Yeah, I think the most challenging really was the sort of the physical demands of the shoot, because clearly the whole film is set outside. We didn't have 1 day of interior shooting, which means we needed 7 weeks of good weather, more or less, because there was no escape. If it would rain, we would shoot in rain. If it was sunny, we would shoot in the sun. That was one of the biggest challenges. And the other one was that what the film sort of needed in terms of shooting special effects, explosions, sort of basically occupying a beach and turning that into a minefield couldn't just be done on any normal beach. I mean, the west coast of Denmark is holiday area. It's holiday country. And so we needed to find a place which Nordisk did in a military area. And we knew that we could have this for exactly 4 weeks, not a day longer. And those 4 weeks were totally fixed because the military would go in and do sort of military training afterwards. So we needed to wrap and finish everything we needed to do on the beach in those exact 4 weeks. And that was a challenge.
First of all, I can say that the first time for us, and it doesn't happen so often that you get to co-produce with Germany. Well, you do that on a financial basis with subsidies and all that, but this was really, as I call it, a really true co-production because we were Germans and Danish working in Denmark. Cast was German. A lot of people who was working on the crew was German, which was, it's not normal. Normally, from our little country, we go to Germany to shoot and use some spend in Germany using German cast, and then we split up again. So this was really, for the first time in my experience, a really true production. Everybody was working on the same thing throughout the whole shooting period. But besides that, the environment we were shooting in on the west coast was a tough one. I mean, salt water, sand in the middle of nowhere, shooting in a military area where the story really took place. We were shooting in the location at an area called the Oxbill camp, which is a military training rehearsal camp now. That was really challenging. So the environment was probably the worst thing, and well, being afraid of the weather, not being able to control that. But it turned out to be a fantastic summer. So it was more like the heat that was the problem.
Finding sort of a real landmine that sort of hadn't been found while sort of preparing for the film on the beach is sort of was a bit of a shock. But more than that, actually is sort of is a reminder of sort of what a legacy landmines leave, and what a complicated situation Denmark faced with over 2 million landmines buried on the west coast by German soldiers, and what a impossible situation to do something right, because getting the prisoners of war up there, breaking the Geneva Convention was a war crime, and not doing it would have kept the Danish west coast as a mined territory for decades. I think it was just 2 years ago that the West Coast was officially declared mine-free, and that is from the Second World War.
Yeah. You know, speaking of a different experience, I would say that before we started shooting, I think it was really, really amazing to be a part of the casting of the young boys and Roland, who plays the main character of the sergeant, being in a room with Martin and the casting director, who's casted all these different boys. That was really an experience, I think, because the amount of talent, when you come from a small country with only 5 million people, you come to a huge country like Germany, and you basically gather the best talent of young actors or young boys here from a very recognized caster like Simone Beer. That was really an amazing experience for both me and Martin, seeing that amount of talent, and Martin playing with them, acting with them. That was just a special moment for me, to seeing that amount of talent, just in front of me. I have to say that was a really big experience.
And the casting process was really interesting, because Martin asked all the boys to prepare for all roles. Yeah. So they came into a room auditioning for 5 or 6 characters. And as they went through trying different combinations of who would be Helmut, who would be Ludwig, who would be whoever, the group sort of found itself. And the natural Helmut, the natural Ludwig sort of emerged in this process, as in who's more timid, who's more of a leader, who's more of a challenge taker, and that was really an amazing process to watch. The subsidies were actually not so much a problem, and that is really due to the remarkable quality of Martin's script. Because the script does an amazing job at telling a story that sort of, once you enter it, you feel you are on familiar ground. It's a post-war story. It's in the tradition of The Bridge or Thin Red Line or whatever sort of. So there is, one feels one is in familiar ground, and yet the script manages to tell the story like a thriller. It is a page turner, and it was that in the draft that I read. It was that from very early drafts on, and that convinced the German subsidy and eventually also German broadcaster and distributor.
Yeah, I mean, being involved from the day one of the development of the script, it hasn't been that easy to gain it, because it's a complex story. I mean, Martin wants to tell a very big story in a little environment with a constantly, present group of persons. So it's actually a very big story in a small environment, if you could put it that way. And that was difficult to develop the characters into each and every one of these boys and the sergeant, who has what role, who does what. and so in a normal world where you do drama, you have the bad guy, you have the good guy, you have these different kind of characters, and this was a group of persons who comes from something and doesn't necessarily need to know each other on beforehand. So Martin's script development throughout the process went in very different ways, but it has always kept this, as Malte said, this thriller feeling. It's a page turner. No matter how no matter where we have been with the story, it has always been a page turner. From a subsidy point of view, the Danish Film Institute and the Danish Broadcasting Corporation were the first ones to get involved from the beginning of the pitch of the story for the development. And when Malte came on, we got the final notes in, and I actually never worked on a project that I felt, no matter what would happen, this would be financed. To be honest, it was because doing the development, it was, even though you had you went too far out with the script and back again, you always felt that there was a red line in it. It was like really, really strong story and untold. So at the end, it all made sense at the end when Malte came on board, because we didn't know how would this work outside of Denmark. I mean, how would people read it? So I remember the first time you read it, I was really curious to get your reaction to it.
It's truly it's always difficult to finance a film. It's always difficult to put all the sort of pieces of the puzzle together. But sort of throughout this process, I always felt there is no way that this cannot be financed, just because of the simple quality of the script and the extreme dynamic and power that it had, even on the page. I think Land of Mine is a film that tackles big subjects. It's about landmines. It's about boy soldiers. It's about sort of the border between retribution and revenge. It's about what is left after a war. It's about a situation where you can't make the right decision anymore. So it's about big subjects. It tells an untold story about the end of the Second World War, and it does all of that in the tone of a thriller that really has your heart in your mouth for 90 minutes while you're watching it. So it's a gripping thriller about huge subjects, and that is a really rare combination.
I'm gonna quote here from a Q&A we did at the world premiere with Anne Hornaday from the Washington Post, and she ended the Q&A with Martin on stage saying, "You did what Spielberg did for water. You did that with sand." I think that's a very strong quote, and I'm going to do another quote, which is basically I have to give the my compliments to LA Weekly, which has in the headline of the review saying, "Land of Mine steers Hunger Games into World War II." I mean, those two quotes were pretty strong, coming from a strong film country and nation as Hollywood. Besides that, it's a very, very strong movie about humanity. What is left behind after a war, hate, trying to forgive, and landmines. Looked through the eyes of young boys because nobody else is left to clear the landmines, and a complex character who's overviewing and supervising these young boys, hating them for coming from where they come, but couldn't hate them because of their, young personalities, and because when you get to know people, there's a face behind that you can't really escape from.
Well, I'm going to start, even though sort of I have less of an experience. Mikael obviously sort of made 3 films with Martin. It was my first experience working with Martin. I think that sort of a fantastic collaboration with Martin began sort of by reading his script. He's a fantastic writer. He's not just a good director. He's also a fantastic writer, and the script had an enormous energy. And then I think the next fantastic thing about him was seeing him in the casting process, and how he had very clear thoughts, but also allowed a natural sort of group to form among these young actors. And he is, when he's working on set, he is probably one of the more intuitive directors, despite the fact that we had special effects and obviously in period films, there's always a lot of technical thing to it, and a lot of, which setup and how many extras, because every single extra needs a costume, and the costumes are Second World War uniforms, so they're hard to get and expensive. So you try and break it down technically, and he sort of sailed through that. He was very intuitive. He shot stuff that wasn't scripted. If he liked something, he stayed on it. He went out to shoot unscripted scenes by convincing the actors at night and say, I'd really love a little scene on the beach with you sort of at dusk. Can we just go out? And, which is sort of a producer's nightmare, really. But still, that plus the fact that the director of photography, Camilla, is his wife, is Martin's wife, and the fact that they had such a natural understanding, and sort of without communicating a lot to the first AD or other people. Again, another one of the producer's nightmares, sort of director and DP not talking to other people about what they're going to do. But still sort of such an intuitive way of sailing through a shoot that could become super technical. And I think that was sort of sometimes hair-raising from a producer's point of view, but then if you see the rushes at the end of the day or the next day, you realize that he was right.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I've been working with Martin from the beginning of his career, and I know him as a personal friend. But despite that, I also can, I can, relate to the fact that Martin is a really intuitive director, but he's a really, really unfocused with his feelings towards the characters. I mean, he could have done this movie in a scene with only, in a black room, and he would still have the same feelings with the actors. Once he's on set, he goes into that tube, which is basically just, what are the person in front of me giving me as for feelings that I know is real or right, or, I mean, so, and he is, in that sense, 100% feelings when he's on set. It's if he doesn't feel what his actors is giving him, he says, okay, we need to change, or you have to do it again, if he feels it. That I've been working with the last 2 movies. The last movie was also a period piece about a Danish comedian, a funny man, which was also, acting on stage, everything in a theater. And Martin was just sitting there, I remember, and he just said, I didn't feel it. But we have 500 people here, et cetera, and they've been rehearsing, the text is there. Yeah, but I didn't feel it. And I want it again. And the next day, he does the same, just with the opposite context. First take, thank you. And I'm the producer. I'm saying, no, we need a backup. We need, So you never know. But there's no doubt that Martin is really, really, really a strong storyteller and a fantastic writer as well. And those 2 combinations of talent is rare. So in my opinion, he is one of the very, very, very big directors to come in the next years in the world. I think he's amazing.